So hi everyone, I'm super happy to be here to talk about what I call Typst in production, which is what I use to turn data into deliverables. Right before I start, I will actually not talk that much about type. This is not really a types talk, surprisingly, mostly because of types. And if you're listening to me right now, it's very likely that you have a much more better understanding than me at Typst. Yet I still use it to deliver production solutions to my clients. What I will talk about instead is reproducibility if you work in data science related field or even in some research fields. It's the #1 issue, and this includes many different issues. The most common one is, will it work on someone else's machine? This is not specific to data science, obviously. Another issue is, will it work 1 year from now? For example, one thing I do very often is I do some kind of annual report, and I will very likely do the exact same thing next year, and I don't want to redo everything from scratch. Another issue is, will it work with new data? For example, the trends might change differently, significantly next year, so I want to make sure that it will still work seamlessly and I can predict what will be the output. And last but not least, can someone less technical than me or anyone who worked on the project run it too? Mostly because I work with people that are not very technical. Oftentimes they are using Excel product, Word document, everything you hate, and I want them to be able to just render them themselves on their machine without having to worry about it. Quickly before starting, my name is Joseph. I'm a consultant. I have my own company, which is called Yellow Sunflower. You can find the website here. I do some kind of data consulting services. I do a bunch of open source work, mostly around data visualization and some charts when I have some time. I want to talk about 2 different projects, one where Typst is used on the client and one on the server. We'll see what that means right after. So the first one is about measuring childhood vaccination coverage in the US. So basically, this was a project made for Johns Hopkins University in partnership with Security Data Studio, which is a US-based company that I often work with. Basically, the goal was to generate 50 reports, one for each US state. In each of these reports, you have to see the current state of childhood vaccinations of different diseases. And obviously, we want to make that automatic and dynamic. So every kind of chart, sentences, every flag, images must be dynamic depending on the state. Our tech stack is mostly using R, but we could have used something else such as Python and Quarto. So those who don't know, Quarto basically it's a tool built on top of Pandoc that works more or less like this. To make it simple, you have a QMD file, which is a mix of Markdown and chunk of code that is then converted to Markdown, and then you can convert to any kind of format you want, such as PDF, HTML, or Word document for some people. Basically, the reports look like this. So you can see on the left more or less what the Typst template looks like. And then we want to generate, so as I said before, 50 reports. You can see that there are many placeholders, such as the flags that are very easy to dynamically set, the footers, and so on. All the charts, obviously, we have to be using data from this specific state. More complex stuff that needs to be dynamic is, for example, some sentences. Let's say, for a specific state, we have, let's say, this specific disease or vaccination coverage has decreased since this specific date. All of those elements must be dynamic, and it's computation before they can be inside the Typst template. So we need to have a lot of input inside that Typst template in order to make sure everything is dynamic. Basically, how it works, we fetch the data from a remote source. We filter on a given state, let's say, for example, Alabama. Then we generate all the charts, statistics, computation, define all the sentences for this specific state. We send all of that info to the Typst template, and then we repeat this 15 times. Now, the current state of this project is that it's finished. They have a single R script that will install all of the dependencies for them. It will render all of the 50 reports and put everything into a Google Drive, because that's what they use for some reason. And we are very happy about that because they don't need us anymore to work on that. Obviously, it will update and will work with new data in the future because it's always using the same source. So we are very confident on what we deliver to them, and it's predictable, and it will just work for them, even if they are not very technical. If you want to learn more about this project, it's entirely open source, and we are using open data. You can find the documentation on this GitHub repository. So if you are interested, you can have a look right here. You'll be able to find the slide later if you need the link. Then a second project I want to talk about is Harassing psychological risk among French workers. As some of you may have noticed, I'm French because of my accent. And For the context, in France, you must have every year to do some kind of assessment of psychological risk among your employees. This is important, but in practice, nobody does it, mostly because enforcement is limited. Like if you don't do it, nothing will just happen. So most people don't care, basically. Practical guidance is unclear in the sense that most companies, they don't even know what to do. Like, how do we measure that kind of thing? Like, do we need some kind of expertise? And the only companies that can do it are companies that have a lot of money and where they can pay consultants, very expensive consultants most of the time, for just doing some kind of survey, and at the end of the day, give them an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF file. So a friend of mine, which is an expert in the topic, came to see me like, hey, we need to do something about this because this is just a mess. Like this could be much more simpler, but for some reason it's cost a lot of money and most companies are not doing it. We need to make this simpler. And I was like, yeah, that seems like a very good use case for Typst. We can very easily implement this in some way. But actually, it's a bit more complicated. The more or less official survey that you need to do is 70 questions long, so it's kind of complicated and messy. All the results will be easy to consume. The main reason for that is because the people that will use the end report are not very technical. It's people from HR or similar fields. It must be fully anonymous. That makes it obvious, but there are some very technical issues related to that. That, for example, in a specific company, there might be only a single person that is more than 50 years old. And internally, inside the chart, they might be able to recognize that the only person that is more than 50 years old has answered this to this specific question and is most likely to be in depression, for example. So that's not fully anonymous. So we need to define a way and find a way to make sure even the charts that are supposed to be anonymous are actually anonymous and people cannot be recognized. And it must be actionable in the sense that once we made that kind of evaluation, we made all the charts, it is cool, but how do we find a solution to that? What is the next step for management, HR? So also this needs to be dynamic and deduct from the data. So basically our solution right now is very simple. We made a very simple website where someone for HR will create an account. Then they get a link to a survey that they can sell to all of the employees. Once everyone has completed the survey, they can just have a button where they can just generate the PDF, and the server will send the person the PDF. So what about Typst in this specific project? Basically, this is just a code snippet to illustrate my pod. It's not obviously the code we're using. But we are mostly using the Typst Python package, which is basically a Python package that lets us use Python and send info to Typst very natively, I would say. This is possible because Python and Rust can very easily communicate to each other, and since Typst is obviously built in Rust, this works very well. So this is an example where, for example, we get the ID of this specific company, we generate all of the charts, we generate what we call insights, which are like actionable recommendations, and send that to the compiler. And once we get that PDF, we send it back to the client. This is a very early stage project. Our tech stack is definitely not stable. Right now, we're using Python for the backend, a native HTML website because we want to keep things simple, and a Postgre database. We will probably change it at some point. Probably Next.js for the frontend. The main reason for that is that very often the right tool for the right job is the one you know the most. So since I know a bit of React, we're probably going to be using that. And Rust for the backend, mostly because we found some very high memory usage when generating the report. This is obviously not due to Typst, but just because Python is fairly slow. So we will probably change this at some point. If you have any thought on that, tips, whatever, or any opinion share, I'm actually very interested, so feel free to come chat right after. So in those projects, what Typst lets me do? My job is not to be a software developer, even if at the end of the day I'm writing some code. It's not why people give me money. Most people, even other developers that I work with, do not really care about tech stuff. They are mostly interested in the output results. And most of my clients or users that are not technical, the only thing where they are interested in is consume data in any kind of way. It can be a website, and very often it's just a PDF file. So how I used to make PDF before the great era we are living in with thanks to Typst is I use a thing called Page.js, which I don't know how many people are familiar with Page.js. Oh, wow. Yeah, lucky. Basically, it's a tool that lets you create paginated pages from HTML and convert that to PDF. So you need to write tons and tons of very weird CSS to make it work, and very often it will just not. So this is still some code that some of my clients are using, mostly because of legacy reason, and I cannot convince them to switch to Typst because imply them give me money, and they don't necessarily want to. But basically, that's what's actually using, and that's just way too complicated, and it's hundreds and hundreds of lines just to make some very simple PDFs. What I really like about Typst and in those projects is that I don't have to worry about the actual PDF. And then the day, I can focus on what actually matters to me and to my clients or to the users I work for. It's just let them consume data in any form. It can be using some chart, a simple PDF report. It does not matter. I can just focus on that, which is an already complicated part, and I don't want to have to worry about, OK, how do I put every images, every text, everything into a report? Should I make it using LaTeX, Page.js, I just said before? But now I can just use Typst, and I can just forget about everything I made, because I can just make a simple Typst template that I can use the style I want. I can work with the designers. I would make a very great PDF design, and then I can just implement it in Typst. It will just work, and it will be fairly simple. If that's something you're interested in, I've started working on 2 projects. The first one is very, very early stage, what I call Typst in production. It's basically a website that is not about Typst. Actually, we'll probably not learn much more about Typst, but it's mostly about how to integrate Typst in other projects, mostly in other programming languages. It's right now just for Python or Rust and JavaScript. There are other things such as CI/CD, all of that kind of thing. And another thing is an R package that lets users write R to generate Typst markup. This is possible because R is very flexible in the way you define functions. So you can basically write Typst, and it will inside R, and it will translate to actual type. So that makes creating dynamic document very easily. And you can compile from R directly, because also you have bindings from Rust to R that are available. Thanks for listening. If I said something wrong, please come say it to me. If I say things that you find interesting or relevant, please come say also. And if you want to find me, I'm mostly on LinkedIn. You can find my email right here, and you can find the slide at this specific address.
Not a question, but a remark, and maybe not a good one to make from my side, but it might be the case that your high RAM usage comes from Typst, not from Python.
So I would investigate that.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I should.
Yeah, I'm the local R Rust guy, and I found your talk incredibly inspiring. I was taking photos and sending it to people. Where is the biggest gap between Typst and R, do you think? Because I have thoughts.
I would say, like, at least from what I do, what I find complicated is I have some data, and this data defines what is the final output, the final PDF. For example, you can define the number of pages, the number of charts, what's inside the chart, all those kind of things. It's not very easy right now to make those kind of bindings from R to Typst dynamic. It has become much more easy thanks to Quarto, which is a tool I mentioned before. And it also works with the other tool I started working on, which is R to Type, that make this, translating what I want to do from R, from data, and translate it to some type, some PDF, which make this simpler, but we are definitely not there yet, because it's still, like, the R community is just a small community, and then you have the Types community, so there's just a few people that are actually using both, so by definition, there are not so many projects that combine the two of them.
Thank you.